everybody. Welcome back to the Contact Center KPI podcast. Today we are speaking with Clayton Drotsky. He has 18 years of leadership leading large groups of folks. And we're going to be talking today about how leaders should approach KPIs. So Clayton, please take a moment and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, no, thanks, Greg. Thanks very much for having me on. My name's Clayton, and I'm currently, I run my own company called Growth Crew out of the UK. I'm originally from South Africa and spent most of my life in contact centers. You know, nobody puts up their hand in career day in school and says, I'd love to work in a contact center one day. I didn't either. I wanted to be a ninja. But you know, the Japanese language and also the university in Japan, my dad, no, I'm joking. I wanted to work in nature conservation, but I ended up in a contact center and it was supposed to be the stepping stone to my illustrious career. And I ended up spending 18 years in that industry. And then 2 years ago, I decided to start my own company and help leaders. By this stage, I had gathered a lot of good experience of leading large groups of people successfully and in great places in the world. You know, I started in South Africa, but I was able to work for a short time in a Canadian call center, and then I was in the Caribbean, and then in the UK. So yeah, I've had a very fortunate time in contact centers. I know that's not everybody's history in a contact center, but I've had a very good time, and I'm still I don't work with contact centers as much anymore. I do, but in a small way. But I help leaders essentially.
Nice. Well, I think some of the stuff we're going to talk about today kind of carries over from industry and industry, right? It's not necessarily contact center specific, but so many contact centers focus on KPIs, and so I do think there's a lot of value in some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. So Clayton, when we did our prep call, we were talking about different KPIs and things like that, and you kind of um, the conversation shifted to how leaders communicate KPIs, and in most cases, how leaders don't communicate KPIs and why they're important. And so that's really what we're going to dive into today, is kind of how kind of top down, bottom up, whatever way you want to look at it, how to communicate the value of KPIs and why they're important to different levels within the organization. So let's maybe give me a little bit of background as to why that's a topic that you wanted to focus on today.
I think, Greg, it's just from my experience. You know, I've seen many times where KPIs have probably driven the wrong behavior, especially in middle leadership, because that group of leadership has to report upwards, and they've got a lot of pressure from upwards to deliver. And then they chase that KPI that they find or have been told is very important from upstairs, but it might not be realistic or serve the users that are supposed to be creating the data for that KPI.
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel that leaders are chasing their tails, trying to deliver on a KPI that might not make sense to them. And then they are communicating this that doesn't make sense to them to others. And there you have, we're chasing something that we don't actually need to chase and doesn't make any sense to anybody. So that's why I want to talk about it. It's really important that leaders from the top all the way down fill in the backstory as to why are we chasing this KPI? What does it mean if we hit this KPI and this one is successful, or this one looks good or is in green, as we like to say? If this is in green, what does it mean for us? It means we're actually doing what we said we're going to do to our customer, and it means that we're going to be successful. But sometimes I find that communication is lacking, that the KPIs are decided at a level, and then the other levels don't really know why we're doing it.
Yeah. So can you give me maybe for the purposes of our conversation, like maybe two different examples of commonly miscommunicated KPIs, and it can be any number of them. But let's kind of maybe get a little tactical here, and let's focus your guidance and feedback and approach this around maybe two. So can you give me a couple different ones you see commonly miscommunicated?
Yeah, from the contact center world, I guess it's the common one would be talk time, how long you're talking to customers and what it needs to be.
Okay.
Number of contacts, for example, how many contacts you have to make a day because the conversion rate for the business is worked out on how many contacts we should make. And those sometimes are impossible to get. So when you're on the front line, you think to yourself, how on earth am I going to phone this many people, even with a dialer or whatever it may be? And it doesn't make any sense. Yet the leader just above that level, the team leader, and then the manager, and then the ops director, they're all chasing that one KPI of contacts, number of contacts. But in reality, how many people pick up their phone today versus 20 years ago?
Half.
And yeah, and now we
Yeah.
still have to phone, we still have to speak to physically 80 people a day. It's not possible. So when the team leader has to have that one-to-one meeting on the results of every individual team member, the team leader is saying, hey, Greg, you didn't make your contacts, man. And Greg's thinking, well, David Copperfield couldn't make these contacts. No one's going to make these contacts, you know? So those kinds of things. It's so simple. But yet, if you go up the line, the EBITDA number is based on number of conversions, right? Conversions are based on how many customers we're potentially going to contact. And that all comes down and it goes downstream. And it doesn't make any sense to anybody that's actually making the call because it can't
Yeah.
happen. Yeah, something like that, for example, I would say.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. So, Mr. CEO at the top focused on EBITDA, market, market share, bottom line, top line growth. They kind of do their math backwards and say,
Yep.
hey, I have 100 agents on the phone every single day. They need to talk with 80 people a day. If we do that, then we're going to hit our numbers and I will get my bonus and everybody will be a happy camper. Brings it down to like a VP level, communicates that down to the VP. VP then takes it down to middle manager, who then brings it down to the agent. Like, where do you typically see that breakdown start to take place? Is it at that first kind of pass down to the VP, or is it the middle manager? Where do we kind of that game of telephone, right?
Yeah.
Where do we start to see that degradation of the importance of that KPI as it's passed down?
I think it all starts before that's even discussed. I think it's, for me, it starts with the game plan.
Okay.
Does everybody know? Because this is very important. From the lowest level to the CEO, everybody has to understand why the business exists, what the business wants to achieve, and why do we want to achieve that? What is our purpose? Everyone needs to understand that. Or new onboarders, no matter what their level. Because if we understand that, and as a company, we know. I have a friend on LinkedIn. He's actually become a very good friend of mine, Danny, and he often speaks about the North Star.
Hmm.
And as a company, it's easy to relate to that. So that's why I say North Star. Do we all know where we're headed? Right? Then once we know where we're headed, then we can kind of figure out what are the KPIs that are going to help, they're going to serve us to get where we're headed. So it actually starts before that. So when we think of a KPI like the contact one, it's already wrong from the beginning. So the communication is that perhaps in that scenario, Greg, the gap is that not everybody was involved on the creation of why we're going for that KPI. And sometimes how I can relate it is this has happened before. I'm sure that you also maybe have an example of this. Is where IT have a brand new system, but they might have never met with the users. So they roll it out, and we're all going, "This doesn't work." But it
Yeah.
really looked cool to them because it makes sense to them in the background of how it was developed, and the ones and zeros makes sense. But for the user, it's like this doesn't work, guys. So that communication was missing. So if a KPI for me is incorrectly being chased, like this contact one we were using, it was because the users were never asked, guys, is 80 contacts possible in 2024? Even with the dialer, people picking up, and no one's picking up. So people want to talk on different channels. So it's not going to work. And then we wouldn't have had that KPI in the first place. So people weren't I'm not saying that contact center agents must be responsible for decisions or be involved in every single decision. But somewhere, someone needs to speak to someone who's the first time, who's the front line and say, you know, is this even possible? And then also follow that North Star. Why do we exist? And is the KPIs, do we need 100 KPIs? Maybe 6 of them are going to take us to where we're headed. Let's focus on these 6 because I think that's going to be the win for us kind of thing.
So I want to make sure I understand it. It doesn't sound like you're advocating for, I guess, frontline agents having a say in which KPIs they're held to, but at least feedback being able to be given, right? Is that what I'm
Definitely, yeah.
hearing?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking of one now when you were talking, but now it's just gone out of my mind. But yeah, it's that they don't, but they don't have to be involved from the very beginning. Um, but certainly when you're making decisions around KPIs, it is good to get feedback from the front line to say, is this even possible? Would you be able to do this today? And can we test it? If we gave you 300 telephone numbers, would 80 of those pick up today? And they could say
Yeah.
yes or no, and that's what happens.
So I guess I want to just, I guess, challenge you a little bit here, Clayton. Um, because, I mean, I've had SDRs before, I've had people on the front lines who they don't want to be pushed. They don't want to, step outside their comfort zone. And so their natural reaction to anything that's hard is going to be, it's not possible. And right, and as a leader, your job is to find that extra like 20% that somebody doesn't realize they have inside of them and kind of pull that out of them. So how do you balance that when you're getting feedback and your frontline people are saying, hey, this isn't possible, but you as a middle manager need to deliver on that? Like where's that kind of balance or flexibility there?
Now that also starts for me way back, and that's what I used to do in the contact centers I worked in. Is there needs to be a solid foundation of leadership, and then it needs to trickle down all the way so that we have a primal need to belong as human beings. In fact, if we belong to something, we actually perform better. This is proven. If we belong to something and we feel that we fit in, our body releases all the feel good hormones, serotonin, dopamine, all the good stuff. And when we belong to something, we're more open, we're more understanding, we're more willing to go the extra for this other person. Um, that's how we are. You can think about like this might be a stupid example, but at a wedding, right? Everybody belongs because we're all part. We all know the couple somehow, some shape or form. We're part of something. In
Unless you're a
that
wedding
moment,
crasher.
yeah, maybe you're a wedding crasher. Maybe you're Owen. What's his name? Owen. No,
Owen Wilson.
Owen Wilson. Um, but you're all part of something, and you'll find that in that moment, you are probably more open to let the other person go to the bar before you, or go to the bathroom before you. You're just naturally more open. And it's proven that people who are in good contact center, or not good contact center, sorry, good cultures, are more willing to give someone the last seat on the bus. It's like this, right? So if you belong to something and you feel like you fit in and what you do is valuable to other people and it matters to other people, but it's also meaningful to you, you will be more willing to do it because you belong. So as a leader in a contact center or wherever you may be, I know what you're saying about sometimes there's pushback from the front line saying no, this is not possible because this is going to mean I have to work really hard. So I'm going to say this is impossible. But if you've got all the foundations correct, like I just mentioned, then and people are comfortable with the leadership because the leadership's intentions are pure that we want what's best for this business, then those people won't. They'll be open and understanding and willing to give the extra mile. You won't have that problem. And that comes all the way back to that whole what's the game plan? Is everyone part of it? Does everyone fit in? Do we have a sense of belonging?
Okay, so I mean, it's not even like we've kind of moved away from the actual KPI, and we're not talking about culture, right? And kind of
Yeah.
setting. So the first time I heard about the North Star metric was from Uber's CEO, who kind of talked about their North Star being rides per day. And so from that point forward, I thought that was always a really interesting way of looking at aligning everything from messaging to sales to product development around does this impact our North Star? Um, then obviously that should drive culture and all that goodness, right? Like what happens though, like if do you just take people off the bus if they don't align to that North Star and they're not willing to give the extra effort? Do you just say, hey, this isn't a good fit for you anymore and move them out of the organization? Like what do you do with those people who aren't willing to go the extra effort when you've done the hard work of creating the culture and laying the foundation and aligning everything around the North Star? You're still gonna have those people that don't want to get onto the same bus.
Look, if the leadership is in place and you've created that culture of that kind of coaching culture mentality where um, everyone matters, it's going to be very difficult for people not to want to fit in if there is a personality clash and there are just those hard nuts that just can't do it. They will make those decisions themselves. But if there's
Yeah.
already a foundation in place where there's regular meetings between leaders and their staff members or their team members, and there are those kinds of one-to-one meetings, and people are curious and interested in people's development and those kinds of things, people will feel very uncomfortable if they're not part of it.
Mm,
If they're still not part of it, and they'll want to leave themselves. But it's those
yeah.
conversations, the biggest reason for conflict in these kinds of situations is a misunderstanding. And it's all due to talking. That's my mantra. Just talk. Talk gets rid of most problems.
Yeah, and do it like face to face, right? Not over Slack, not over email, not over a text message, right? Like how much gets misconstrued when a CEO sends an email to the entire company
Hmm.
with this is our new direction and you all need to do this, and everybody's like, thanks, but no thanks. My job's already hard enough. Um, it's a little bit different when you get on and actually have a personalized conversation with somebody, even if you are a little bit removed from the day-to-day frontline activities.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you almost like self-select out, right? Like if you're not willing to get on the same train as everybody else, like you're like, yep, I don't fit here anymore, and those people actually find their way out of the company. So
100%. And yeah,
yeah,
if I'm a leader, for example, and you're one of my staff members, my duty is to meet with you. And I don't mean a one-to-one does not have to be an hour-long formal event with an agenda, because that's how quickly what I see from leaders is if that's the case, those get cancelled quite quickly. And when I was the leader in contact centers, I used to love one of my KPIs, my favorite one is adherence to your one-to-ones from my leadership team. So I want to see
Mm.
a life happens, and you might be called to the doctor, or you might have to go fetch your kid from school, so you might miss a one-to-one. That happens. Hey, I get it. But at least 85% of your one-to-ones adhere to them, because in that one-to-one, what I preach is that we play a massive role as leaders in the development of our people, in how they feel about themselves, in how they feel at work. So if I went to the first meeting with you, Greg, and I said to you, Greg, tell me what you're proud of since being here at Abstract, what you're most proud of. And then tell me what's the one thing that you do not want me to ask you to do because you don't know how to do it. And tell me what's the one thing you want me to ask you to do because you're brilliant at it, but I've actually never asked you. And just
Love that.
there, as a leader, I'm getting some really good insights on you. Now I can challenge you and I can develop you. And people love feeling good about themselves, and we love being listened to. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm I'm going to challenge you when you tell me there's something you don't like doing, because I'm going to ask you, why don't you like doing? What's the main challenge about it? You're going to tell me what your challenge is. I'm going to say to you, Greg, how are you going to change this? What are you going to do to change this challenge? How are you going to get over this challenge? And you're going to tell me how you're going to change it. I'm going to say to you, that's fantastic. What are the consequences, Greg, if you don't change? You're going to say, this is going to happen. I'm still going to be stuck in this rut. And I'm going to say, that's true. So what are you going to commit to? And when can I ask you for some feedback in our next one-to-one? So if I'm involved in that situation as a leader with you, you now got some accountability that you need to come back to with me. And that's a simple way of doing it. It's so simple. Leadership is so simple. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, well, I wish it was simple. I would argue that as much as I wish management and leadership were synonymous with each other, they often are not. And I think
Mm.
people often get those two things very confused. And so I think that's where that tends to break down is when leaders become managers and managers think they're leading by managing. Um, Kind of that whole picture of the leader in front of the cart with the boss kind of in the back yelling everybody to go,
Yeah.
forward. Yeah.
And no, you're right. And you know what? And that's such a good point you bring up, Greg, because that I've seen in living color is when people, leaders become managers, and that's because of upstairs pressure from KPIs at
Mm.
times. When there are
Yeah.
so many KPIs to report back on,
Yeah.
and you're just so involved in the day to day. It's what's called a learned helplessness. You become so busy in the day to day that you actually lose the ability to make a decision. So you don't escape from your position and hover above your position like a helicopter and think to yourself, is my team and the tasks and what we're supposed to be doing the most effective way of doing it? You get lost because every day you come in and you continue spinning those plates that were spinning yesterday. They're still spinning, so you're just spinning them. You don't actually get time to meet with your people and talk about what the KPIs actually mean and the North Star and what they're proud of and all that stuff. So you're just like a headless chicken and you become a manager because all you're doing is plugging holes. Because Greg, my boss, is going to ask me for something at lunchtime. I know it because he's got that big meeting tomorrow. So I've got to get these KPIs ready and I've got to tell him why these KPIs are the way they are. But meantime, they don't mean anything because they're not possible kind of thing. And that's what sometimes happens.
I like it. We've kind of brought that full circle unintentionally.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that was planned in your mind, Clayton, but we kind of did a full circle there. Well, I appreciate your time today. I guess final thing here as we wrap up, is there any kind of little wisdom you would give anybody who's kind of really struggling with thinking about how to communicate KPIs down to their team? Like maybe what's kind of one tip or trick they could take away from today and go deploy tomorrow with trying to improve that process internally at their company.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing, know this as a leader, you are more privy to what's going on in the business because of your position. You know why the numbers are the numbers. You know why certain processes are the way they are, why we use one system above another system, why we do the marketing we do. You know this as a leader. Use what you know to fill in the backstory and connect people. Because when I tell you, Greg, we've got some decisions to make as a team. These are our KPIs we're currently working on. And here's the backstory as to why we use these KPIs because they talk to our North Star. I'm filling you in. I'm bringing you in. It's something that in Dan Coyle's book, Culture Code, it's something that Greg Popovich does for the San Antonio Spurs. He brings it in, right? Fill in the backstory. Why are we doing this, everybody? Because then you connect people, and when they feel like they're part of us, they're part of the. This is why we do it. So if you're a leader communicating KPIs, communicate why. Why is it
Like
important for the business?
Simon Sinek, Start with Why.
Yeah,
One of my favorite books. Yeah,
yeah,
I like that. So just fill in the backstory. I think that's a why is this KPI important, and make sure that gets communicated all the way down,
yeah.
and people understand why they're being asked to do something. Well, Clayton, this has been awesome. I know we went off on a little bit of a tangent, but again, we kind of brought it full circle, and so I learned a lot of goodness here, especially some things that I'm probably going to take in my one-on-ones with my team. So I appreciate this. Thank you for your time today, Clayton. Again, it was awesome having you as a guest, and hopefully everybody learned something from our time together today.
Yeah, no, Greg and Claire, thank you so much for providing this platform for people like me to talk about what we're passionate about. It means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thanks, Clayton.